everyone, and Ajay, thank you for that incredibly generous introduction. Although I have to tell you, after listening to Vanita Gupta, I'm really regretting that I didn't go to law school and that I didn't take up an incredible and inspiring career like she did. Thank you so much, Vanita, for everything that you're doing and for the incredible inspiration that you provide to all of us. Well, you know, it is a little intimidating for a wannabe failed lawyer to be in this room full of incredibly accomplished people. I see around me judges, prosecutors, defenders, litigators, and at least I can console myself that if I ever find myself in trouble, I know exactly who to turn to help me get out of it. But seriously, let me just start by first commending Saba for the very important role that you're playing as an organization, not only in advancing the cause of the South Asian diaspora community that practice law, but also actually improving the legal profession and advocating for greater inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. It's such an honor for me also to be here with Judge Sreenivasan, and I had a chance to go to the chai session with him and listen to him, and again, just his words, his humility, but also just his incredible excellence is just a huge motivator for all of us in trying to be our best selves. But today we can see that South Asians are breaking barriers and making strides in virtually every profession. And we can see the contributions of South Asians in business, in academia, in arts, and in entertainment. But nowhere is the presence felt more palpably than in public service. We live in a time when we have South Asians who are federal judges, U.S. attorneys, assistant attorney generals, a surgeon general, and even a brigadier general in the American Air Force. South Asians are in the governor's mansions, in state assemblies, in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I have the privilege of working in an administration where the U.S. ambassador to India and the 3 assistant secretaries who deal with the strategic, the security, and the economic relationship with South Asia are all Indian American. Now, it does from time to time create a little bit of confusion when we testify on Capitol Hill. I guess you guys heard about that little incident. You know, that hearing was actually quite remarkable, and not only for the notoriety that it got, but we had 2 assistant secretaries of state testifying who were Indian American, but we also had on that panel an Indian American member of Congress and the first Hindu American member of Congress, Ami Bera and Tulsi Gabbard. But lest we take for granted the diversity and the inclusion that we see today, let me note that these gains have been the result of hard-fought battles over many years. And for decades, the corridors of power on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue had very few brown faces. 30 years ago, wow, that's a long time, I entered college with dreams of international travel and adventure, much to the disappointment of my parents, who, like yours, nurtured dreams of my becoming a doctor. But the idea of a diplomatic career seemed fairly remote and far-fetched. So much so, in fact, that during a graduate seminar in diplomacy, my professor, a retired ambassador, thought he was doing me a great favor in suggesting that I could have a brilliant diplomatic career if I were to return to India and join the Indian Foreign Service. Notwithstanding the fact that I was an American citizen and I had been in the United States since the age of 5. Well, he was half right. I did manage to have a successful diplomatic career, and I didn't have to join the Indian Foreign Service to do so. And I'm privileged to work for a president and a Secretary of State that really value diversity and see it not only as an expression of our core values, but also as one of the key strengths of our democracy. Being the first Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, who is also of South Asian heritage, has certainly generated a great deal of interest, but nearly all of it has been positive. Whether it's with my government counterparts in South and Central Asia, or with meetings with young people and with civil society, I get a tremendous response to my heritage. Because in many parts of the world, opportunity is not as equally available, and the corridors of power are reserved for the connected. I often speak at colleges and universities when I travel overseas, and I get asked about my personal journey. And when these young people from India, Bangladesh, Tajikistan, Afghanistan hear that I was born in a small town in rural India, that we often relied for water from the well, that we often studied by the light of a kerosene lantern, well, they're shocked. I like to recount my childhood experiences for two reasons. First, I want to make sure that they know that someone who looks like them and came from a very similar background as them is able to have this amazing opportunity. That is the power of the American story. It is the power and the promise of America. That story is not just mine. There are thousands and thousands of stories just like this. And it is the American story. It's what makes America the beacon of hope and opportunity for so many around the world. But it's also what motivates our foreign policy, our desire to expand that circle of opportunity so that it reaches more people in the far corners of the world. The second reason that I talk about my childhood is I want them to know firsthand that I know the challenges that they face, as well as the potential that they hold within them and the opportunities that lie ahead. I'd like to share with you a few thoughts of what I see as the massive opportunity that exists across Asia and why I am so optimistic about the future. Now, I know that the headlines today are dominated by the many crises that we're facing around the world. And make no mistake, these are challenging times. But it's also a time of tremendous opportunity, and particularly in South Asia. As Ajay was noting, President Obama's rebalance to Asia is really a recognition that in the coming decades, the prosperity and the security of the American people is increasingly going to be tied to the prosperity and security of Asia. Many economists predict that by the year 2050, Asia will comprise 50% of global GDP. But for Asia to reach its potential, it has to create inclusive growth, sustainable growth, and tackle pervasive corruption, create more accountable governance, and invest in its people to generate skilled and productive workforce. The countries of South Asia stand to be enormous beneficiaries in a more connected Asia, and even the major drivers of that, what people call the Pacific Century, and what I call the Indo-Pacific Century. U.S. foreign policy in South Asia is anchored in this vision. And I have to say, we see tremendous scope across South Asia in our partnerships with these countries. With India, we have seen a dramatic elevation in our partnership after the election of Narendra Modi, who won with an unprecedented electoral mandate, the first single-party majority in over 30 years. President Obama has described this relationship as one of the defining relationships of the 21st century. And Prime Minister Modi has said that when the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy work together, it is not just the people of our two countries who will benefit, it is the world. And in fact, much of our partnership with India is transcending the bilateral relations and really looking at the global challenges. President Obama's Republic Day visit this past January was a tremendous opportunity to really elevate that partnership and talk about how our two countries will work together to address critical challenges in energy and climate change, to create greater prosperity, and to advance global security. We have seen India moving rapidly in that direction. As we saw the security situation in Yemen deteriorate, it was Indian forces that mounted a massive evacuation of civilians of many nations. Nearly 20 countries were evacuated, nationals of 20 countries were evacuated by the Indian forces, including Americans. And in Nepal, where I was just recently, we've seen the Indian military working hand in hand with the US military and countless others to provide humanitarian assistance to those who have been tragically affected by this earthquake. While I was in Kathmandu, the news came of one of our helicopters gone missing, a Marine helicopter that was mounting search and rescue operations. The Indian forces worked hand in hand with the US forces to mount a massive search operation. And the Brigadier General of the Marine Forces who was in Nepal told me that he was very moved that the Indian forces were as committed as if they had lost one of their own. That is what we see as the future of US-India relations. That ability to partner and be in interoperability in addressing global challenges. And that ability to have our people, our militaries, our businesses be able to work and join together to address the mounting challenges we see. Now we are working very closely and coordinated to look at the recovery of Nepal, the reconstruction phase. And we will be going there again very soon to do a pledging conference where India, China, Japan, Korea, as well as the United States, Europe, Australia, are working together to do a coordinated effort to rebuild Nepal. This is probably one of the first times where we see in a humanitarian crisis an Asian-led effort. And that shows you where we're headed in this Asian century in the decades ahead. In Bangladesh, we're working to support a development agenda that brings greater prosperity across Bangladesh, and we've seen enormous strides as the Bangladeshi government and the Bangladeshi civil society have done tremendous to invest in their people to advance healthcare and education and food security. But we are also troubled by the challenges that we see on weakening of democratic institutions, and we are working to improve and strengthen labor standards and improve democratic institutions. Let me just say, as I work across this region and I see the opportunity to help countries connect, that we're also very aware of the fact that we are no longer in an era where relations between countries are the purview of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Department of State. Not only do we have a blurring of lines between local and global, domestic and international, and a whole of government approach, but we're actually moving into a whole of society approach.